In my experience, the best way to explore a town's forgotten history is to seek out someone who has already done their homework and have them share it with you.
Hey sightseers, Sightseeing Sally here, and Marty is behind the camera once again. Today we're in Avon Park, Florida, checking out the forgotten history of this small town. Now if you didn't know, Avon Park is located in Central Florida, about an hour south of Kissimmee. And actually, if you looked on Google Maps and drew a line from Vero Beach to St. Petersburg, Avon Park would be exactly in the middle. Now the history of how Avon Park got its name is rather interesting.
Originally named Lake Forest, the town's name was changed to Avon Park after one of the early settlers who came from William Shakespeare's hometown convinced Oliver Martin Crosby, the founding father, that the town was very much like Shakespeare's Stratford-upon-Avon.
Thus, it was named after Shakespeare's hometown. Now, if you look all around Avon Park, you can find orange groves upon orange groves. But what's a fun fact about Avon Park and their orange groves is that before there were oranges, there were pineapples. Yes, pineapples. Back in the late 1800s, pineapple was being grown in this region with the hopes that it would become the next major agricultural crop for Florida.
Unlike citrus fruits, however, the tropical pineapple cannot endure temps below freezing, which means even the slightest frost can damage an entire pineapple crop. After the Great Freeze during the winter of 1894 to 1895, farmers realized growing pineapple as a crop would never be commercially viable in an area subjected to frost. Thus, as we all know,
Citrus became Florida's agricultural crop of the future instead.
the other fascinating thing to note about the landscape around here is that drive down any side road and you'll likely find
one of several lakes in and around Avon Park.
Unlike the inland lakes normally found in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, these lakes were
Most likely created from a sinkhole. At least that's what I was told by the local historian.
Our next stop in this journey into the forgotten history of Avon Park is the old train depot.
It now houses a museum run by local historian Elaine Levy. Now, from what Elaine told me, this train station used to be segregated.
Built in 1926 under the South's Jim Crow laws, the former Seaboard Airline Railroad Depot had separate rooms and ticket windows for its clientele.
With the whites using this entrance
And the people of color using this entrance. According to the placard in the museum, this formal segregation lasted here until 1965. Despite the history that some might wish to forget, this former train station, now museum, is home to a number of exhibits meant to educate visitors on Avon Park's past. With the closing of the train station in 1976, you'd think the tracks would be abandoned as well. Not so.
It just so happens that the tracks are still in use today by the Amtrak. You know, the same train that I took when I went from Milwaukee to Chicago. If you haven't seen that video, be sure to check it out. Now, earlier when we stopped here, Marty and I got to see the inside of the California Zephyr, otherwise known as the Silver Palm.
Originally built in 1948 as a Pullman or sleeper car for the Western Pacific Railroad, the Silver Palm ran from Chicago to San Francisco as part of the California Zephyr. Later, when airplane travel took over and the California Zephyr retired, it was sold to Auto Train and converted into the dining car you see today.
Talk about an interesting piece of forgotten history being preserved to this day here in Avon Park.
Driving through town, it's obvious what has survived the passage of time and what has not.
You can see what remains of an old service station here in Avon Park. There's even an Ace Hardware store, just like the one in Pound, Wisconsin. As we were driving by, this little house here caught our eye, and I'm glad we stopped because hidden in the bushes was this sign. Now, how cool is that to find the oldest structure on Main Street still retaining many of its original features, and purely by accident? What's left of the Max Wild Avon Park Hotel? As you can see, it's been long since removed. However, what makes this so interesting is that you can find the original block making machine in the old train depot museum.
Walking around Avon Park's historic district, you can find relics from the past.
As you can see, Marty's looking at an old marble column. And what's interesting about this piece of history is that it used to be installed in the corner entrance of the First National Bank, located at South Lake Avenue and West Main Street.
Not all of Avon Park's historic buildings suffered this fate. The next 3 buildings, designed by architect William J. Heim, are still in use today.
Across the street from where we're standing, you can see the Jacaranda Hotel. Built in the 1920s and now listed on the Register of Historic Places, the Jacaranda Hotel is one of the oldest continuously operating hotels here in Highlands County. The story of how the Jacaranda got its name is really quite interesting.
You see, on the land where the hotel now sits, there used to be a tree. And not just any old tree, a 150-year-old Jacaranda tree. Of course, nobody wants to chop down a historic tree, but the tree was in the way, and progress had to be made. In the end, the tree was axed and the hotel was named in memory of the tree.
Inside the Jacaranda, as you can see, they're renovating it back to its original state with businesses gracing its first floor.
Moving on to the other buildings designed by Heim, you can see by looking at
Avon Park City Hall
and the Brickell building the unique contrast in his designs.
Off in the distance, you can see Marty checking out another iconic piece of history here in Avon Park. This appears to be an old bandstand. It is. It's the original bandstand that was built in 1897, and then it was restored July 4th of 1976. Now, across the street from the original bandstand is this really interesting place. It's the Diving Girl Diner. Known as the classiest dive in town, the Diving Girl Diner is fashioned after a neon sign that used to exist on an old hotel here in town. The old Reed's Motel, now a budget inn. Set to open June 1st, the Diving Girl Diner was supposed to have the old neon sign from the Reed's Motel. Unfortunately, the sign ended up being too big, and instead they're making a replica of the sign to use for the diner. Now, interestingly enough, that original neon sign from the hotel, you can still find it here in town.
At a place known as Pure Grit.
Inside the store of Pure Grit, you can find the old hotel sign from the Reed Hotel. Designed to look like a swimmer, you can see the tubes from the old neon sign. While we're in the grocery aisles here in Walmart, there's one more piece of Avon Park forgotten history I want to share with you. And it involves these, or better known as Brown and Serve rolls. Well, maybe not this particular brand, but the Brown and Serve brand that you're all familiar with.
Actually, all the brown and serve rolls you find in the store today are the result of this Avon Park invention. As the story goes, Joe Greger, a local baker and volunteer fireman, was in the process of baking a batch of dinner rolls when a fire broke out. Not wanting to start his own fire, Greger pulled his half-baked rolls out of the oven and left. Upon his return, he decided, for whatever reason, to throw those rolls back in to see what would happen.
And the rest, as they say, is history. If it weren't for the efforts of Elaine and the other volunteers here, a lot of this history would be long forgotten.
For more than 20 years, Elaine has been an integral part in preserving this town's history. Much of what I shared in this video, I learned from Elaine. And it's because of Elaine we decide to head to the next town featured in this video and explore its forgotten history.
So Marty and I decided to take a drive over to Sebring, which is like the neighboring town of Avon Park, and we're exploring forgotten history
Of this Florida town.
Now, if you didn't know, Sebring, Florida is one of the oldest towns in the United States that's still built around a circle. And it's the oldest town in Florida whose downtown is still in a circle.
Which, if you're into urban planning and design, exploring this town's layout could be rather fascinating.
But that's not why we're here. If you take a walk into the circle, you'll actually find a grave site for the town cat.
Back in the 60s and 70s, a cat probably not unlike the one we see here became an infamous part of Sebring's history.
Now, as I understand it, there used to be an old IGA store here on the town circle. Unfortunately, I didn't get the address from Elaine Levy, the town historian over in Avon Park. So we're kind of guessing as to which building used to be the old IGA store, which is where Whitey, or Missy, as many of the town folk called him until they figured out he was actually a boy, hung out. Marty's guess is that building over there used to be the IGA store. I tried looking it up online. Unfortunately, I didn't get any success with that. However, if you're from Sebring and you know, leave it in the comments section below. Now, getting back to the story about Whitey.
Now, Whitey was one of those cats that nobody in particular owned. He just showed up one day and made the downtown circle of Sebring his home. He especially loved visiting the IGA store and could often be found napping there, much to the irritation of the health department. But the people there didn't mind, and soon Whitey became a bit of a local celebrity, charming the townsfolk and snowbirds alike. He even knew how to keep his belly full with minimal effort. Every night like clockwork, he'd head over to the Cat House restaurant, where a beef dinner would be waiting for him. Sadly, in August of '79, Whitey fell ill and was later put to sleep. Since he was such a popular part of Sebring, the town's folks decided to honor Whitey by giving him a proper burial in the town circle.
And that's the story of how one local cat got buried in the town circle here in Sebring. Until next time, this is Sightseeing Sally. As you can see, Marty's enthusiasm for the cat story ran out. I don't know. I find stuff like that totally fascinating. Marty, on the other hand, unless it involves things like sketchy women, explosives, and other questionable, illegal things, he's not into it. I'm just picking on him. Of course, Marty's a saint.